The next part is our panel, and what I would like to do now is introduce Commissioner Mick Gooda, who will be our facilitator for this session. Looking forward and taking action, it's time to get it right. Mick Gooda is a proud Gungaloo person from central Queensland, and in his spare time can usually be found in the Sunshine State. Mick Gooda was the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner for 6 years and began his term in early 2010. Immediately prior to taking up the position of Social Justice Commissioner, Mick was the Chief Executive Officer of the Cooperative Research Centre for Aboriginal Health for close to 5.5 years. He resigned from his position as Social Justice Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission in August 2016 to take up the position as a Royal Commissioner for the Royal Commission into Child Protection and Youth Detention Systems of the Northern Territory. Mick has been involved in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs throughout Australia for over 35 years and has always maintained and actively promotes the concept of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples being intimately involved in decisions that affect them. His focus has always been on the empowerment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Please welcome Commissioner Mick Gooda and the panel.
Give me a hug.
Of course, I'll give it. Trying to get out of the way.
Thank you, Geraldine. Can I acknowledge Auntie Matilda House? We know each other from way back, for the great welcome to Ngunnawal country. I've spent a lot of time on Ngunnawal country, and as a Gungaloo man, you've heard me say this before, Matilda, our people ask me to give a couple of messages when I come to places, and that is to pay my respects and salute the power of the local people, the Ngunnawal people, who continue to fight for their country and their culture. My elders also tell me my job is to leave your culture and your country in the same condition it was when I arrived. The only place I have authority to do anything is in Gungaloo country in central Queensland. But I remind Matilda, I do have connections down here, and a fair few years ago when I first started as Social Justice Commissioner, I mentioned my people walked around this country. And Matilda was looking at me all through the presentation, and as soon as it finished, she ran up and said, "You don't come from here." And I said, "No, my white family come from here. So if you go outside towards Yass, there's a Gooda Creek." And Matilda thought it was okay to pay homage to the white people, but I couldn't be a black fella saying I walked around here. So that's my, I sort of, when we talk stolen generation and finding your family, and you find your Aboriginal family, I'm the opposite with the Goodas, because we found our white family. So for the first time in my life, about 10 years ago, I now have white relations that I know. So that's a bit unusual. Today we're going to talk about what's the future for us. The conference would have spent a lot of time talking about what's wrong. And can I say, as a Royal, I'm on the Royal Commission, I'm a Commissioner on the Royal Commission, we've seen plenty of what's wrong in the Northern Territory in the last 12 months. We've heard some pretty sad stories. We've heard heartbreak of families torn apart. We've had them give us evidence firsthand. We've heard from vulnerable witnesses, those young fellas that were in that Four Corners program, telling us about their experiences in places like Don Dale, Aranda House in Alice Springs, and the Alice Springs Detention Centre. And in all of that, we wonder where we go with it. Where do we put that emotion that we feel when we hear those stories that happen to our kids? And when I say our kids, I think all kids. Even though the majority of the kids in child protection and youth detention are Aboriginal, there's still white kids up there, non-Aboriginal kids who suffer. We heard their stories. We heard grandmothers and grandfathers coming and meeting Margaret and I, and all they want is access to their grandkids. And they were a white couple, but they had Aboriginal grandkids. They didn't make a difference. They were their grandkids. Where do we put that as Aboriginal people? Where do we put those awful stories that affect us and affect our mob? Where do we put the racism that we hear? And while I was exposed to it in a Royal Commission, we all get exposed to that every day, just about. And it's that stress that we feel, and it eventually kills us. That's why we have this low life expectancy. Stress kills us. So we may want to talk a bit about positive stuff and how we can go forward this afternoon, but I can understand if people don't want to do that and still want to talk about what's wrong, because it's almost in this country there's a willful ignorance and a willful blindness to what happened to us. And we've got to deal with it. I'm going to introduce my friends on the panel now, because we've all got our own stories. And I'm going to a few minutes for Jackie, Andrew, Junie and Megan to tell their stories. So instead of reading from the bio, we all know these people. They're heroes, they're fighters, they're warriors. I thought I'd just introduce them from what I know. Jackie Huggins is a countryman from around our area, a fighter. Her mum, Jackie wrote a great book about your mum that opened up the stories and started telling the truth about what happened in Queensland. Things like the stolen wages, as well as the stolen generation. So Jackie has been there at the forefront of fights right through, and now she carries on that fight as the co-chair of the National Congress of Australia's First People. So please welcome Jackie. Andrew Jackomos, the Aboriginal Commissioner from Victoria, but with a great history of work right throughout Australia. I first met Andrew in Queensland. Andrew was working in the Department of Education. I went to Woorabinda as a project officer while we replaced a very sad incident when a fella committed suicide. And one of the jobs we had, I'll tell the story, Andrew, about these two mob from Woorabinda got a scholarship to go through Canada, USA and Canada. So Andrew in this time worked with me to set up this big program of going to America and Canada. We made gifts and big things for them. Then one day I'd gone back to my job and Andrew rings me and says, I don't know what's happening. There's this big international incident going on with those two fellas from Woorabinda, and it turns out they had a few too many ales on the plane from Sydney to Hawaii, and that's as far as they got. So after all the work we did, that's as far as they got, but we didn't laugh too much then, Andrew, but we do now about it. That's our mob. You know, what do you do? But Andrew's experience right throughout Australia, and when I became Commissioner in the Human Rights Commission, one of the first persons I spoke to was Andrew, because the work Andrew's done, particularly in Victoria around justice, is groundbreaking. And I rang him after we had this election in Queensland, and Campbell Newman's government cut 16,000 people out of the public service, including abolishing the Murray Court. Andrew had taken, same thing happened in Victoria, but Andrew had taken, such as his advocacy, Andrew took the minister, because the Liberals got elected and their platform was to abolish the Koori courts. Andrew went out, took the minister out and showed him and talked to him, and on the way back, the minister says, how can we put more money into this thing? We're not going to abolish them. So Andrew was a great advocate who can actually tell a great story and actually makes a difference. Andrew, please welcome Andrew. My sister, Junie Oscar, Fitzroy Crossing, Bonobo woman, fought against alcohol abuse. Fought a lot of our mob. They didn't want restrictions. And Junie and I were talking at that time, and she said, "It's so hard, Mick, you know, what do we do here?" And I said, "Well, we're dealing with really committed people. Alcoholics are really committed. They don't want anything to change." And it was very tough for Junie and Maureen, Emily, who fought this fight and did really important, such important work on things like FASD. Aboriginal people have led the way in research on FASD in this country because of what Junie, Emily, Maureen did. So as a result, everyone thinks only Aboriginal kids have FASD. But we lead the way in that research, and Junie and her team actually are making a difference on those kids. And if ever you want to see a story that just says it all, try to find a video. June came to New York at the sitting of the Permanent Forum on Aboriginal Affairs, on Aboriginal issues in the UN, and launched it. It's Tristan's story. If you can find that video, have a look at it, because it'll tell you the story of Fitzroy Crossing. The other great thing about June is when I left my job, the greatest thing that happened was the appointment of June Oscar, the first woman to hold the position. I kept on getting mistaken for Tom Calma the whole time I was in here. And I said in the Senate estimates one day, "You've got to understand us short, fat black men with white hair all look the same." One thing I can assure you, they're never going to mistake June Oscar for Tom Calma. Please welcome June. Megan Mitchell, my fellow commissioner from the Human Rights Commission, a great advocate, our first National Children's Commissioner. I was there when Megan got appointed. And I know from inside Megan's heart, the majority of the job she does is around our kids. And when you read her reports, you will see Aboriginal kids, the issues affecting our mob are right up front. And Megan has been really important. She was our first witness at the Royal Commission. Came up and told her story about how Don Dale looked, stark place that almost scared her. Cement, hard beds, aluminium toilets, big doors up the front that you think had gone away 30 years ago, but they're still there. And for me, the tone was set, and I won't say too much about the Royal Commission. I will say plenty about it when we're finished. But what struck me about Megan's evidence was just great. It talked from the heart about what happened and how bad that place was. And then she got the first question of cross-examination from the Territory Government. And the question was, "We're sure you were wrong about air conditioning. Are you sure there wasn't any air conditioning in there?" Because Megan said she couldn't see any air conditioning or feel air conditioning. Nothing about the treatment of kids, her position on that. Nothing about what we think should have happened in Don Dale, and all of her opinions and her expertise giving us some advice on that. The question was about air conditioning and whether she got it wrong. And that's what we're battling with government when they start looking at things. They'll look at the air conditioning to make sure we told the truth about that, but are a bit blind to the other things that are happening. Megan helps in her role is to uncover all of that. So please welcome Megan. So Jackie, I'm going to come and sit down there now. What do you think?
we're on. What do I think?
The
about
future.
Oh, the future, of course.
For our kids, let's frame it down a little bit about our kids.
Yeah, part of me obviously thinks, I worked in a very privileged position about 6 years ago. I was at the University of Queensland. I worked there for 14 years. And, I saw some of the cream of the crop, the kids that were absolutely succeeding in life, doing great things, We had one fella, I don't know what happened to him, but he wanted to be the first Aboriginal astronaut, Kids with dreams, kids with great opportunities. But what I realised about them, of course, for most of them, not all, they had a deep connectedness to their culture, to their families, and to their futures, about where they're going. So I kind of lived in this bubble, I guess, for quite some time. But always knowing that outside of that, Mick, there were the kids that were not as fortunate as those kids that I saw at the university every single day and who were achieving to great things. So I thought, gosh, they're the kids that we really do need to get back to concentrate on in terms of what I guess the next 10, 15 years of my working life would be like. I think that those kids, of course, are very deserved of a great place, a respectful place in our history and within our community. So, I do see that. I see it from both sides, and I get very conflicted sometimes because I know that they're in our country, there are great families, there are people thriving, doing great work, and kids are succeeding, and that's the kind of stuff I want to stay with. I want to stay really positive with that. But at the same time, I know in our communities out there, especially our remote and bush communities, that is not the case, and that our children are being taken away at an astronomical rate, of which they shouldn't be. And I guess we all really need to apply our best efforts in terms of, doing something for those kids. And I guess for all of us, and I know that's why you're all here too, because you work at the coalface of that as well. And as I said on my first day here, I just salute you. I salute the work that you do in your communities and the programs you run, and how you're attempting to do that. With our kids, of course, there's that great issue of compassion and love, and being within a kinship structure, and being without families, because that's where being with families, because that's where they will totally thrive. And I know the grannies, I know a lot of my friends and our friends, Mick, who are grannies taking care of their baby grandchildren from when they're babies. And, I must, personally, I support a lot of those grannies as well. So, I do see a mixed bag here, but I want to concentrate on the really positive and how we can get those kids, to a full education, to a way of life that encompasses and that gives them the very best of life. And it's a hard road for all of us. But, we can start. We're blackfellas in this country. We have survived, we're very resilient. And with all of us, pulling our best efforts together, I know that we can give these kids better lives, and to make the systems and the institutions really aware, that these are our kids, we're not giving up on them, and we're going to see them flourish.
Thank you. Andrew, your vision for Victorian kids?
I think it's important for us to remember that the great majority of our children, be it in Victoria, and I presume and I know elsewhere, the great majority of our Koori kids in Victoria live in safe, strong, culturally rich places, homes. The great majority of our kids. Each year we see improvements, closing the gap on early years in Victoria. We see record numbers of our children completing Year 12, and for me this is fantastic. And we should never forget that. But you know, our work is to work with those who don't have those opportunities, who aren't in safe places, who've been taken away from home. Sorry. One of the when I started in my job, one of the first things I did was visit a young fella in youth detention, and he was in isolation, only 13, 14, and he was so proud. He said, "Unc, come here, I want to show you something." And he showed me the cell on which his mum gave birth to him on the concrete floor when she was 13, 14, same age. And ever since I had that direct experience of, yeah, he was so proud. For him, that was home. That was where he was safe to be. I just thought we have to do better. And being here, and this is the first SNAICC conference I've been to, and it's just fantastic, just to see so many positive, good people talking about so many positive, good projects that are making a difference, and that's given me a great thrill. I know in Victoria, we are doing some good things in Victoria, led by the community and in partnership with government. And I see that we can break the back of increasing numbers if we work together, if we transfer all our kids home to community, we can make a difference. I know we can.
Jenny, Social Justice Commissioner.
Thank you, Mick.
Tell us your story about kids. You come from I've been to Fitzroy Crossing a fair bit. Your young people's facility you got there is a typical example of what happens with government. Build a beautiful building and take the money away.
I think that's the experience of many of us in this room. Ladies and gentlemen, my name's June Oscar. I come from Fitzroy Crossing, and I'm a proud Bunuba woman. I've worked in community most of my working life, working for the Kimberley Land Council, the Kimberley Languages Resource Centre, co-established with Miramadawang Wulab getting the Kimberley Interpreting Service. I've worked for CALAC, chaired Marawarawara Aboriginal Resource Agency, and was the CEO of Maninwandigura for 12 years. So my history, my understanding of the struggles and the achievements of working in community development is what informs me and what has brought me to the national role as the first Aboriginal woman in 30 years in the role of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't hold anything against lawyers. In all of my community development work, I understand the critical need for lawyers and their expertise and how we can involve them in all of our work. But in the community development role, many of you would appreciate and acknowledge that you have to try and be everything to every situation. But what is it that that guides you and keeps you in that place. And for some of the recent challenges that we as a community and as a women's organisation took on and remained focused, was the simple explanation, in fact, is that our children were worth fighting for. When everyone who wanted to know what it was that drove us to pursue the alcohol restrictions in Fitzroy Crossing, the 2 licences in town is owned by Aboriginal people. We own them. So we said we bought these business investments because we were concerned about the way that alcohol was impacting the quality of life for everyone in our community. And somewhere along this journey, we started to put profit before people. So the very people who would in turn benefit from this business investment were dying to keep a business alive. We had 50 deaths, preventable deaths in 2005, 2006. We, as a community, attended 50 funerals in 12 months. We lost too many young people to suicide. We were seeing families losing hope and whose lives were being so diminished that their quality of life was very little. People were living with immense stress. So, you know, this is aside from tackling the FASD issue in our community, which we embarked upon as the second stage in this journey of community reconstruction. As a community, had we waited for governments or someone else to do that for us, we'd still be waiting. We had to take this matter into our own hands, and it came at a huge price. Relationships, long established relationships with families, friends, in our own families and in our broader community, were all tested. And, you know, I'm pleased to say this many years on, some of those relationships are being sorted out and repaired, and, you know, we've come to a new point where we have agreed to disagree with some of our own family members. But we've got to have something that drives us to take action, to create the change, and that no one can do that for us but us. So our voice, our sense of empowerment, our sense of why we were doing this, we had to own that process and come up with all of those reasonings. And today I'm really proud of how we as a collective, a community, are travelling down this path together where I can, you know, look back and look forward and see people like Jadena Davies and Amarilla Oscar who are here as young women in our community leading into the next phase of community reconstruction, and the nurturing and empowerment that needs to happen so that we grow the next generation of leaders is absolutely critical. But the thing is, in all of this, is we must have hope. We cannot lose hope. And as Jackie said, our peoples have been on this part of the world as the longest, you know, civilization on earth, and we're not about to give up.
Thank you. As a National Children's Commissioner, Megan, where do you see the future?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank SNAICC for inviting me on this panel to be with these very wise and eminent people. So it's an honour for me. And also to be with all of you out there in the bleachers that are doing such important work to improve the lives of children and young people. And I used to call Mick Commissioner Gooda when he was at the Commission, and now I call him Royal Commissioner Gooda. So he's stepped up a bit. But, you know, when Mick and I were both involved in a project called Justice Reinvestment, and I know that's been the subject of some discussion here, but in the Burke community, very early on. And we went to Burke together and we talked to the young people in the community about what was good and what was bad, about how things were going in Burke and what the risks were for them and what they needed to make it a better place to live in. And apparently this was the first time that anybody had talked to the young people. And sometimes I feel that that's the case. We're talking about people and doing things to people who we really need to engage in the conversation because they are wise and have fantastic insights. And I have to say that the experience with Burke, and I go regularly to Burke, and I just went a couple of weeks ago back to Burke Primary School to talk to the kids again about how things are going. And I go to their presentation nights. It's all about staying the course, you know, as well. It can't be just a one, you know, swan in, try and fix stuff and out you go again. It really is about staying the course there. And staying the course there really is turning things around. The community's engaged. The community, as June was talking about, has taken control. And they're the ones looking at the solutions there, and it's working. And they're also engaging the young people. And I've got to say, just a little anecdotal kind of observation over time. The kids that I've talked to are increasingly more articulate, happier in their space, learning about their culture, being proud of their culture. So I'm seeing this kind of capacity building, in a sense, in the classrooms, in the primary school. And, you know, that's where it all starts. It's in those children being happy and safe. And that reminds me of another theme that I've heard here today, and that is really about how the behaviour of adults deeply impacts on children and throughout generations. And that's where we've all got to step up as adults to ensure that we respect and honour the rights, safety and well-being of all children, and that we allow them to have their voice, to make choices and to set their own goals, as Muriel Blamblet talked about today, so that they can be part of their own self-determination journey. And it's great to be seeing some of the young people that are involved in this conference and the leadership programs that are out there, because I've got to say, I've talked to lots of kids, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island kids, lots of them, and no matter where they come from or what their background, they are fundamentally full of hopes and dreams, and we really need to give them the opportunity to fulfil those hopes and dreams, and we have the capacity to do that, I believe. And just another thing about, I was right about the air conditioning, I just want to make that clear. There is no air conditioning in that maximum security unit, apart from one room, which is supposedly the education room. It wasn't on at the time when I went, there was nothing in that room. There was a table and a chair, and no computers, no children. But the rest of the place has no air conditioning. It might have fixed it now. Maybe that's an outcome of it. But I've got just one other thing. Because of that Royal Commission, and I know Royal Commissions, you know, they get various reviews as to how useful they are. But, you know, I went to a lot of facilities talking to young people in detention. And one of the places I went to was the Queensland maximum security adult prison, where there were 17-year-olds in there, and I went to have a chat to those kids. And I got a call late last year from one of the young men who was now out, and he said, look, I've been watching all that stuff about Don Dale and you know, and thinking about what happened to us there, and there's really terrible things happen to me and others, and I want to tell somebody about it. So he's taken that further, and so I do think these things can empower young people to stand up for what's right, as long as they know they have rights and they will be respected and heard.
Thank you, Megan. If it's okay with the panel, I'd like Thomas to come up. Please welcome Thomas Mayo. He's one of our great union leaders, the MUA. We all know how powerful the MUA are. And in the Royal Commission, the MUA, through Thomas, has been totally supportive of what we've been doing in the Royal Commission. But Thomas has got another job today. Thomas, so a couple of words, because this is about the future as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mick. I just pay my respects to the traditional owners here. I'm born and bred on Larrakia country in Darwin, and I'm a Torres Strait Islander. I'm also the branch secretary of the Maritime Union of Australia in the Northern Territory, which is waterside workers and seafarers. I actually organised with Matty Bonson and others in Darwin the first rally in reaction to the disgrace that Don Dale was, and through that and other activism that I do as a leader of my union and as a member of the community, I was asked to get involved or to attend the Darwin dialogue about the constitutional reform. It was something that was, I learnt, I didn't know, but I learnt that it was something that came about, these dialogues, because some of our leaders pushed hard for that, to ensure that what we wanted, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders wanted, as far as potential constitutional reform, was heard. There were 13 dialogues around the country, and that culminated at Uluru at the convention. And I went there because, as a union official, I learned how to organise. I learned about the power of collectivism, and I thought, what a great opportunity this process is for us. And I went to Uluru, as an elected delegate in Darwin, with the great hope that we would have an outcome, a consensus, on something that we can campaign on. Because what I learnt as an organiser of these rallies and and other actions is that we are far too reactive, and not to say that we should not react and that we shouldn't react better and in a more organised way. We should never stop doing that. But what are we doing as far as the big picture goes? What are we doing that really learns, takes the lessons of the past about why the good things that we've fought for that have been implemented in legislation have been taken away from us, smashed, like ATSIC, the NAC, the things that have added self-determination and empowerment to our people. What are we going to do about that? And the dialogue's considered that. And the Uluru Statement calls for three things, really. It simply calls for a constitutional voice to Parliament, so we have a say on the things, in Parliament, on our own affairs, and voice and truth and treaty, a Makarrata Commission. A Makarrata Commission that does the truth and justice work, that tells the truth about what has happened to our people and why our people are in the social, the situation that we're in, that you guys are on the front line of. And then also facilitating and supporting treaty. We already have treaties happening. In Victoria it's begun. Other states have announced that they're going to enter into it. How do we strengthen that process? How do we give the weaker party more power and that backing and framework to make sure that the best outcome is achieved? The statement was received in Uluru by around 250 delegates there from all around the country. And some of those delegates there, or many of them, were the people that had been on the streets and fought for so much that we have now. They were people that had marched and picketed and all that sort of stuff. There was some really strong elders in the room. And when this statement that was written by a number of people elected off the floor during the convention, and when it was read out on the last day, it was received with standing acclamation. I saw people in that room that had been in passionate debate against each other in the workshops embrace each other with tears in their eyes. It was such a magic moment that this came about. The artwork around it is by the Mutitjulu people. The people at the convention signed around where the statement was printed in the middle there towards the end. This cannot be another statement that just gathers dust in a museum. We've had statements, we've had petitions, you know, we've had expert panel recommendations, we've had Royal Commission recommendations. We cannot let this be another one of those that are just ignored. I want to say in the vein of what this closing session is about what's next, you know, and what do we do for our children. It will be a crying shame if we do not take an opportunity for incremental progress on this big picture reform. And even if it's not everything that we want right now, if it sets a platform for our children to then further our struggle and achieve what ultimately we want, then we're just letting them down and we're not fulfilling our obligation. I've got an extra canvas here. I'm going to go straight down to that table there, and I'm going to put it down on that table with a permanent texter there. I invite you all, if you support it, what I've been doing is getting around the country and building the support. If you support what we're calling for, if you support the constitutional change that considers what has undone us before, which is legislation easily being smashed, and enshrines it in the Constitution, please sign that extra canvas. The plan is that the canvases that I take around the country and get extra signatures will go around that, extra artwork, and this will be a powerful document that will result in powerful change. Thank you. And sorry, thanks, Jadena and Joe Wilmot for holding up the statement there and for inviting me to speak, Mick. Joe was one of the Uluru Statement Work Group. There was 29 people elected out of the at Uluru by the different regions that participated, and Joe is one of the delegates for South Australia, and she puts her own time into. There's no resources for this this campaign at the moment, and we're doing our best. So thank you.
Just following on from that, Andrew, like the voice of Aboriginal people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, what do we do to make ourselves heard? Well, we have a saying in Queensland called binangunch. It means you're hearing but you're not listening. So they hear us, so how do we make them listen?
I think we need to, wherever there's an opportunity to have a voice of the people, we must take it, whether it's in local government, whether it's in state government, territory government, or in the federal government. We need to be part of the process. And I think one of the key lessons we learned from Royal Commission on Aboriginal Deaths in Custody was about the exclusion of our people from the processes. Judicial processes, democratic processes. I strongly believe that we need to have our voice and our presence throughout all levels of government. I think that's a fundamental. Yeah. I also like the concept of having dedicated seats in parliaments for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and I think that should be a part of the treaty processes that we push for, and in constitutional reform. I think we need to make partners across the broader community to sell our message.
Yeah. Junie, you came to a watershed moment in Fitzroy, do you think? And we've had lots of watershed moments. The apology, in my view, was a watershed moment in this country, but we lost the opportunity. We need to create our own, don't we? A watershed moment where we start to make things different. Like I was looking at my phone here before, I wasn't... we said for instance, in the opening statement of the Royal Commission, one of our councils said that, you know, we need to confront some sort of inquiry mentality where investigation is allowed as a substitute for action and reporting is accepted as a replacement for results. So we hold all the inquiries. We found 51 inquiries. Do you think, I might be putting you on the spot, but we've got to take these opportunities like this Royal Commission. Helen Milroy was here today on the other Royal Commission. I don't know how they've done 5 years. We should make her a saint for what Helen's done on that Royal Commission. So what do you think we should be doing now to create that watershed moment where the relationship changes?
Well, I think we have to remain in the game, as it were.
Yeah.
We can't just throw our hands in the air and say this is too hard. And I think the belief in we can create and impact the change, and I think that keeps a lot of people in the game, and you know, some of the people that you just referred to, that we believe that we can change this situation. The issue of voice is absolutely critical, and we must keep emphasising at every opportunity and reinforcing this message that without us, things will remain as it is. So for any agency or governments, whether they're state or federal, they must work with us to impact that change. And I know, you know, everyone here, you've remained in your spaces and you've kept chipping away, you've kept driving that change. And that's, you know, whilst things are very grim and it looks like we're not being heard at times, there are the small changes that we are impacting, whether they're in our own organisations, our own communities or states. And we must have you know, the critical mix of cooperation and support at the national level, the national Indigenous leadership level, where we, you know, reach a point where we're not pulling each other down.
Yeah.
Because, you know, for us, whilst we can look at others and expect, you know, there's a certain level of expectation or degree of expectation around change that we want to see happen with others, there has to be change within.
Yeah.
And our attitudes around change has to shift within our own Indigenous spaces. You know, the support of Indigenous men folk like yourselves, respecting the Indigenous women's leadership and working together with us is absolutely critical. You blokes can't do it without us, and we need to work together.
Yeah.
Sometimes you know, women will lead in certain areas, and there's a time and a place for that, and we know when that is, but we also know that we all have the collective responsibility of reinforcing the message that you cannot achieve change without us. And our voice, as Thomas and Joanne have always been reinforcing, we have to be in there. We have to own the space. We have to have our voices. And in my role, in this new role as the Social Justice Commissioner, I will be ensuring that the voices of community, the voices of those who are mostly quiet, do come through, do reach where they need to reach.
Megan, I've got the importance of, I know working with you was so, like Megan would say, what's the kid saying? Everything. How do you think the kids are hopeful? You connect with more kids than just about anyone I know.
Yeah, I think they are. I think they're such good raw material, and then we do stuff to them that sort of suppresses them. And I think, one of the reasons the Convention on the Rights of the Child exists, one of the reasons the position that I'm in exists, is because kids lack power. Children lack power. They can't vote, they don't have power, and they are controlled by adult systems like the child protection system. And we were having a bit of a corridor conversation. And I think this is an issue with generations of Aboriginal people as well, the control of other people over their lives, which disempowers folk. And I think we really, in terms of changing systems, and I think the systems we have reflect that control piece. And in terms of changing systems, one of the projects I'm doing at the moment is on teen parents, and 25% of them are Aboriginal kids. And you can imagine how much at risk they are of having their kids removed into the system. And so what I'm trying to do is get to how we can help those young people be the best parents. And they all want to be. And they're great, that a lot of them lack the support they need, or they've got these systems hovering around them, waiting for them to fail. So they don't engage with those systems, who they should be able to get help from, not control and punishment from. And I think that's the way we've got to challenge the systems and the legislation and the practices and the policies. These things should be bound to help people rather than catch them out or punish them. And we've got to change it up like that, because otherwise people continue to be disempowered and have stuff done to them all the time and be controlled. So that's what I was thinking when you were all talking about this, and why the voice sometimes doesn't get listened to, because we have systems that doesn't allow it. We've really got to change up some of those systems.
I remember in WA when I was working there, we had a kids conference, and we did something innovative, and we said we'll let the young people organise it. And I was working in SNAICC at the time because we had all the money. The battle I had trying to stop the adults interfering with the organisation, we said they're pretty good. They're young people up to 25, they can organise this stuff. But the older people, even our mob, think they know better. We know what these kids. So it's really a challenge within the Aboriginal community as well to give our kids that voice, isn't it, Jackie?
Mick, I'm going to just slightly digress because I've got two really important points I must make. I think the funding cycles and the funding regimes are out of whack here, because we heard yesterday, 53% of our population, of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population, is under the age of 25. Where are we spending most of our money? At that other end, or in the middle? Why can't governments, why can't we invest from conception, I'm not saying naught, I'm saying conception, because we know all the programs around mums and babies and the fetal alcohol syndrome too, as well, June, and I salute you, my sister, in the work that you and your mob have done and continue to do. Why can't we invest that money in those very, very early years to stop us before we get to the point where it's irreversible or it's too hard and we apply band-aid treatments here, and it is just too far now. People are down the track. It is just very difficult. So we need to look at applying that investment in the very early years. The other point I want to make quickly is around close the gap. There is a refresh happening from the government. I would really love to see, and we've been calling for this, Mick, as you know, for a number of years now, but a target for early childhood and child protection. And that has to be there, and SNAICC has been calling for this also, through our Redfern statement, which is about asking government, but demanding government have appropriate, meaningful and genuine relationships with our community-controlled, led organisations. So those two, I think, need to tie into, how future investments in our children are made.
Yeah, we're in the Royal Commission, we're looking at a whole range of issues, including one of funding, but we're looking at it. We've looked at the money going into the Northern Territory. We probably think there's a lot of money, enough money, but when you see where it's invested, it's not hitting the ground. You've got duplication within the federal and the territory government. You've got the same program being run by different departments and they don't talk to each other. So we're looking at that. But the other thing we're looking at is what you'll say. And what it is, we've gone to this, one of the things that really get up my nose is this tendering stuff. And we're writing, tendering's okay if you're tendering for blood tests where you can itemise everything, you can standardise everything, and you can get a price per unit. And it's standardised, you can do that. And that's what they try to do with this. But what we're talking about in what we work in is complex human problems. The issue around kids is they call it a wicked problem. It's not wicked that they're wicked people, it's just wicked to deal with. So we're going to be asking another way of doing it. How do we actually, because all of our mob, the thing we get from the Northern Territory, so is where are the Aboriginal organisations now? And we're strangling them. So when you see the report, I'm sure someone somewhere, and it may have already happened, said we're stepping outside our terms of reference, but you're not going to get people like me on a Royal Commission that's not going to talk about that, not going to talk about money, and not going to talk about relationships. So I'm going to wind up a bit, and I'm going to ask you a really personal question. How do you cope with, we've all been at this for a fair while. How do you cope, Jack?
I thought you were going to ask me how old I am. That's the personal question. 61. But anyway.
This is hard stuff.
How do I cope? I think I apply this through what I really preach, is that interconnectedness with family, community, and being around those your friends, who love and cherish you. And that's how I get my strength, I think, Mick. And it applies, I think, to our kids too.
So what would you say to a young leader? And I hate that term. It's really, we got people who are merging, and I know some of them. We did some work around the Durabellin area years ago, June, and one of the things we talked to the young guys, well, why don't I go and do that? Look at your mob. How do we actually? What advice would you give to a young person?
Oh, I just had breakfast with one this morning who's just got amazing vision, and she wants to be a young leader. Well, she is a young leader right now. And she's had all these kind of problems, She's actually separated from her husband. She has 4 kids, but she still has that drive and that vision that wants to keep going. So I think, as people ourselves and our wisdom, we've got to support and nourish and nurture those kids. So I just say, you keep going. And, when you get my age, then you will know that a whole lot of stuff has fallen into place. Because we were there once too, Yeah. So that's how I would say, Andrew.
What about,
I'm going to follow Jackie's lead, and I'm going to digress for a second.
Good on you.
So, I'm absolutely proud of the great work that we're doing in Victoria. And that work has come about through strong partnerships. And that's strong partnerships between community and community coming together in unity with a voice. It's strong partnerships with the community sector, the mainstream agencies, and it's a strong partnership with the Department and Child Protection, who we see as a partner. Because it's only when you have strong partnerships and they're not the enemy, they're the part, can you influence behaviours and change programs. And my aim in the time that I'm Commissioner, and hopefully beyond, is that we change the child protection system, that it's Koori friendly, that we have Aboriginal people at all levels of the system, from client, working with the children, right through to policy development, program delivery, prioritising. And we've done that through working in Strong. We've now got a commitment in Victoria to transfer all our children in our home care home to our community. We've now got a commitment working in a strategic manner across the state to transfer guardianship, to give guardianship to our communities. And I know when our children are in our care, will we see absolute compliance with the Aboriginal Child Placement Principle. I know that our children, from evidence, will go home quicker to family, to community, have stronger identity when they're in the care of our communities. And that's what I'm about. I know that that our children, a lot of the children that I've seen who are parents have come from the child protection system. We don't do enough to invest in the children whilst they're in our care. We know the majority of our kids in youth justice have come from child protection, either directly or have had. So we need to work with those. But I know we can have better outcomes when the kids are back home with our community, and that's, for me, the aim. For me, it's, there are good people in community sector, mainstream, in child protection, and together we need to come together as a joint project, and that's what I'm most proud of, that I've seen happen between community, the broader sector and government to return our kids home. And we aim to have all our kids home by 2022. We're now, I think, up to 30%, and each year we've got milestones that we're going to achieve. But it's not just milestones, blanket milestones. There will be the work done. And for me, that's both building on the self-determination of our communities, our children, and our families. Thank you for the digression.
But no, I'm not going to let you off.
Yes.
How do you survive?
How do I survive? I don't know if I am surviving. Dancing, red wine.
Karaoke.
Yeah, standing at the back of someone singing a karaoke.
Yeah.
I'll be quite honest. I see a counsellor, a great counsellor, and I think everybody working with children in traumatised should take that opportunity. I think the days of saying I'm a man and I don't need counselling, I think
we're tough.
That's so.
Juni, I'll get a closing, last comment, then I'm going to ask you that question too, because this is I've experienced your position, and while the Royal Commission is basically almost one issue, I know the impact that you're under. So last comment, but tell us how you relax.
Okay. I'm not in this space alone. I don't have to think and behave like I am, because that then conjures up and creates a lot of unnecessary stress that you place on yourself. So for me, I know that I'm in this position for this term, but I have a wonderful network of people that I can call up, check in, sound out. And that's what you do in leadership positions. You don't sit there on your own and think you can row this boat by yourself. So, I'll call any of my friends and colleagues at any time and seek their advice. And I do check in with someone who's specialising in counselling, just to clear my head. It's really helpful. It's really healthy. Meeting up with friends for a meal, investing in yourself, your own self-care. We girls love pampering, so we,
got that.
Got to do that. So that's important. but to also know that as an Indigenous person, we walk in two worlds. We walk in a number of different worlds if we are carrying other important issues that have a real big influence in our daily lived realities. So we look at things very differently to non-Indigenous people. And we must not deny ourselves when we look at things like that, because the mainstream world always places that pressure on us to conform and to do things in the Western way. But that's not all that we are. We are the people we are from the history, from our connection to place, the journeys of our families. They all form part of our reality. But we must also know that we need the tools to be able to survive in this modern reality. And many of those tools are provided to us in our early foundational years as we're being raised by our families wherever we are, whether we're out bush and on country or we're in communities that's surrounded by major cities and centres. We learn the lessons of and the understandings of what makes us who we are and our story. With that, we go out and we find the most useful tools that we need from the Western world to help us navigate the next stages in life. And that's my message to younger people, is to know who you are, have the confidence in that knowing, but know that you can also take the best from what life has to offer and make it yours.
Thank you. Megan, how do you keep a happy face? You're one of the happiest people I know, but you get exposed to so much, like all of us in this room.
Yeah, I was
just
actually
Megan.
thinking too, like I grew up, I was raised by a single mother in the 60s, and she'd lost all, and she was unmarried, so, you know, or at least my father was married to somebody else, and she had lost all connection with her family, so I didn't have, and I was the only child, so I had no family other than my mum. And I'm thinking about what keeps me strong, and it's all of you. It's all the connections that I make in my world. That's my family now. And and it's got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I can't remember any of their names anymore, but it's great. There's a lot of strength in this room and beyond, and I think we all really need to understand that. There's a lot of strength and power in this room. And the other thing I think that drives me is basically knowing there's a wrong to be made right. It's like deep inside of me, and I'm sure it is in other people. Yeah. And Mick, I've got to say that's an excellent question to ask on Are You OK Day. Happy Are You OK Day, everybody. I think that's the thing. Check in, make sure we're all okay. And the thing that really relaxes me is footy, cricket and shopping.
We've come to the end. I'll just say something. And it reminded me, Megan, when we went to Burke, and when you work for the Human Rights Commission, June, you probably found this out already, it's probably the poorest agency in the Commonwealth. So we're walking around Burke and they're saying, what you doing here? We're here to do. Well, we got the submission for you, for money. We said, well, it's no good talking to us. We got no money. Well, what you doing here? And we talked about justice reinvestment. And over time, we built a nice relationship, and it wasn't built on money. So, because our mob, you know, we're pretty clever. We know how to play the system. I recently went to a community, and I won't name the community, and I met with the men. And I said, I only come here to ask one question, but we'll talk about a few things before we get there. And the question was, Andrew, you'd be happy, if the government came into this community and said, we want to work with the community on kids, on your children, what would you say? And of course I said yes. And it was very important for me to say that, because I've learned in this Royal Commission you've got to have lots of evidence. You've got to have, when we go to government, you've got to have all this stuff. But then they said to me, you know, we all fight in here. We all fight. Everyone knows we all fight. This community fights. And I said to them, you know, that's not your issue. That's not this community's issue. This is an issue around disempowerment, around a loss of identity. And I can take you to any community in any continent in Australia, in the world, and show the people who've been disempowered like you, and I'll guarantee you this, they all fight amongst each other. I immediately see those men straighten up in that meeting. One got up and said, I'm going to put $20 on the table because I think we should forget about all these agencies. What Junie said, and let's have a barbecue. Let's get together as a community and forget about organisations and forget about who you work for, and we'll just be a community. The thing about those Burke, and why we got welcomed back into Burke, when we didn't have money, didn't have much to offer, because people just started to feel good about themselves. And if that's one message I think we should take home, let's make ourselves feel good about ourselves, because that just makes a difference when you feel good about yourself. And I think the people in Burke started feeling good about themselves. The men in this community immediately started feeling a little better because it wasn't them. It was another issue that drove that. So that's a message I want to close with, that let's feel good about ourselves for a day, a bit longer. And but June's wanting to say the final word, and of course, yeah. I'm an Aboriginal man, I always give Aboriginal women the final say.
Look, I thought I'd just take this opportunity to inform you that 31 years ago, the Commonwealth Government funded the first national Indigenous women's consultations. There hasn't been a national consultation with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women about our issues since that. And the women's business report was provided to the Commonwealth, which gave rise to the creation of women's programs and grants that we could apply for women's activities. So a large focus of my work will be to undertake from December this year a national consultation with Indigenous women, so with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women across the country. We'll try to get to as many places as we can, and the focus of the consultation will be our right to security and our right to success. So look forward to contacting you and seeing you then.
The last thing I've got to do is, can we all thank Megan, June, Andrew and Jackie and Thomas? Can we thank them?